Welcome to another episode of my Wake Up Call. This is the podcast where I find out a little bit about my guests, and then I want to find out much more about them. But I tell them to save that process until they're on the show, because as I get to know them, and you'll see why I wanted to get to know them, you, our listeners, will get to know them also. And I'm pleased to have today on the show David Glass. And part of the reason I'm pleased is he started off as a psychologist and then transitioned into law and then into family law. So as you, my listeners, know, I love hearing people's journeys through their life and how they end up doing what they're doing. He's the author of Moving On, Redesigning Your Emotional, Financial, and Social Life After Divorce. And since many of you, my listeners, are divorced because you're part of the statistic, I'd really recommend that, because as much as you might feel relieved to have gotten out of a marriage that wasn't all that satisfying, it's really bumpy afterwards. And you can learn from your own mistakes or learn from the mistakes that David's learned from all of his clients and all the things that you can do to maybe avoid them. As I mentioned, he's doubly trained in psychology and law. He's currently a certified family law specialist and litigator with a concentration in complex child custody litigation. He provides supportive advocacy to his clients by looking at the full range of issues in their life rather than just focusing on the narrow legal issues. He also serves as the chair of the family law department for the law firm of Enenstein, Pham, and Glass, and he joins us now. David, so good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. But so I will start off like I do with all my guests. If you were to step back and look at the through line of your life, all the way back to your childhood, I don't know if it's as neurotic as my childhood, but it might be. Well, if you became a psychologist, there's something there, but all the way from there through becoming a psychologist. And then I'd like to know what caused you to then decide to go into law and then into family law and then to focus on what you're focusing on. So tell us about what the through line is. And if you were to step back and tell us your purpose or calling, fill in those blanks.
Okay. I mean, for the longest time growing up, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist. My mom's a therapist, and she had a home office above the garage, which abutted my bedroom through the closet. I used to sit in the closet and listen to her provide counseling to clients. And it just fascinated me that people came in with their problems. She would listen, she would talk to them and help them in some way. And that's from late elementary school on. And later I took off her bookshelf a B.F. Skinner book, Walden 2. And that just fascinated me that Skinner had this idea of how to create an ideal society using his theory for psychology, clinical psychology. I later found out the limits of B.F. Skinner, but at the time in high school, I was enraptured by him. And so I went to college. I was a psychology major undergraduate, and I was applying to all psychology PhD programs. And then I found by accident, they were starting a dual degree program in Philadelphia, where I grew up, where you got your PhD in clinical psychology and your law degree at the same time. And they smashed it all into 5 years. So, instead of 5 years for the PhD and 3 years for the law degree, 5 years you were in and out, not including finishing your dissertation. And so I thought it would be an interesting area that could contribute to my psych practice. And maybe I could add forensic psychology, and maybe I could add teaching. So I went into it intending to be a psychologist. But the change came for me when I worked. I had 5 summers. And so one summer I worked as a psychology trainee, and one summer I worked at the public defender to see if I would like criminal law. And one summer I worked at a family law firm. And it seemed a great combination of the counseling that you could do as a therapist. And then it seemed to me that it would allow me to be a lot more pushy than I could be as a psychologist, and essentially telling people how to fix themselves or how to fix their situation. So I went through with the psych program, became a psychologist, and the aha moment or the wake up call was that it was too sedentary for my personality style. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it intellectually and emotionally. But one day a client canceled, and I started thinking, oh, if the very next client cancels, I could run out and see a movie down the street. And that got me thinking, maybe this isn't the job for me for long term. And so I already had the law degree, and I went back to the law firm where I had worked as a summer clerk, and they made me an offer, and I jumped right into family law. So that was the first wake up call. Was although I enjoyed psychology intellectually, emotionally, as a career, it probably wasn't going to fit me.
So, so share with us when you made that pivot. So you thought of being, or you were a psychologist, and it was too sedentary for you. And what did you discover when you got into law? Was it less sedentary, or you, as you said, you could give counsel as opposed to, being somewhat more listening therapist. So talk about that shift for you. Sure.
And so when I was a therapist, I was cognitive behavioral and more of the rational emotive therapy, Albert Ellis. So it was very pushy style of therapy. And still for me, it wasn't directive enough. I just wanted to, people come in, tell me the problems, I'm going to tell them how to solve it. That doesn't make for good therapy. But for me, it's sort of the way I wanted to work with people. And so when I jumped into family law, I wasn't just sitting in the office in the same chair, having people come in and talk to me. One day I was out at a dental practice and learning everything about the dental practice and how it worked. And the next day I was in court arguing why twins shouldn't see their dad anymore because he wasn't being nice to them. Every day, every couple hours was a new story that I could work on, and I could get elbow deep in trying to fix it. And so that's why I like the law and still like it. It's and being a family law attorney is the only type of attorney I ever imagined being once I went through law school, because it's all the personal stories and working with individuals, and they come with problems, and it's not just legal problems. In fact, most of their problems are non-legal, and I just don't think they were being served by their divorce attorneys, who I've sat in on other attorneys' initial consultations, and they never ask, what went wrong in the marriage? They jump into what assets do you have? How much money do you make? Do you have kids? What's the custody schedule going to be? But there was no discussion of what went wrong in the marriage. And so I try to bring that to my family law practice.
So how did you move to moving on? So, because I guess a lot of family lawyers, the caring ones may care about what happens afterwards, but they're still focused on leading up to the divorce and getting them through that. So how did you shift to moving on and redesigning your emotional, financial, and social life after divorce? Why that?
Well, I myself got divorced 13 years ago. And it was completely amicable. My then wife and I sat down at the kitchen table. We hadn't been arguing in front of the kids. We hadn't been fighting. We had sort of drifted apart. And we both felt like we were running our marriage like a business. We were making money. We were accumulating assets. Our kids were doing well in school, but we weren't close emotionally. And both of us we had two girls. I was concerned, particularly, I didn't want my daughters to think a marriage was two people working together and accumulating assets and everything going right. I wanted them to see that close personal bond, two people who love doing everything together. And so we worked it out at the kitchen table, and then suddenly I'm single. And I looked for resources to figure out, well, what do I do next? And I couldn't find them. There were a couple religious organizations who had published how you can reestablish your life, but there really wasn't a guide to here are the ways you can look at your life and improve it in what I call your second chance for happiness. After you've been in a relationship that didn't work, what are you going to do now? So I thought back then, 13 years ago, I should write a book. And it took me another, 10, 12 years to actually get around to doing it. But even now, it's one of the few books I think out there that doesn't focus on the nuts and bolts divorce or how you hire an attorney or how you argue your alimony case. It just focuses on, all right, you're divorced now. Now, what are you going to do? And how do you want to live your life?
So what were some of the things you learned in that journey and writing the book that may have been hidden in plain sight, or maybe they'd be surprising to people, and especially some of the things that you learned that could save a lot of people who get divorced a lot of time and wasted time, which you don't get back?
Right. Well, I mean, the first thing that I hadn't really talked with people about, but what I realized when I wrote the book was that right after getting divorced, I got myself back into individual therapy, and I committed to a full year of therapy, no dating, because I wanted to figure out what I had done wrong in the relationship. It was very easy for me then or now to list, here's all the things that my ex-wife did wrong. It was a harder thing to figure out, how did I contribute to that? And so it took a year until I was finally feeling like, I think I've fixed the parts of me that contributed to the downfall of my marriage. So now I've made myself the best I can be so I can go out and possibly meet a new partner. And so that was the first thing. And since then, I've been encouraging all my clients, listen, don't jump into a new relationship. That people understand that, but they do it anyway. And I see a lot of my clients over the past 25 years, they get divorced, they jump into a new relationship, they think their new partner is somehow different than their last, and they later find they've picked a very similar person, or the way they act created a very, very similar relationship that they had previously, and they go through a second divorce. And so I just wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to fall into that trap.
So what you're saying begs the question, if you knew then what you learned from therapy, do you think there would have been a way to prevent getting divorced?
I think the relationship would have gone better because I would have been a better partner. But ultimately, me and my ex-wife didn't match up on enough things. We got married relatively young at 25, 26. The things I thought I wanted in a partner then didn't match at all the things I was looking for in a partner when I got remarried 11 years ago. And I think we were two different people trying to pretend that we fit together. So what I learned helped me find my new partner, and what I learned helped me make this relationship almost ideal. Each year gets better than the last one. Our hardest year was the first year, and it wasn't even that hard. So it really benefited me for this relationship. I don't think it would have saved the first relationship. It would have made it easier, though.
And are you still friends with your ex?
Friendly. So we don't do things socially, but our girls were 8 and 10 when we got divorced. And I knew it was absolutely essential that the girls see us as friends or friendly if they were to have any chance of coming through it in a good way, that they weren't going to try and split me and their mom and go back and forth and try and gain favor with either, because we were a united front. And so while we didn't meet and we didn't even talk on the phone, we emailed and texted and kept ourselves on the same page with regard to my daughters, one of which is who graduated college and is working, and one who's still in college. And they're growing to be successful adults because we treated each other with respect, and because we showed our daughters that they weren't going to use the divorce to try and get away with stuff.
Well, that's great. Now, did your ex go through therapy as well?
No, that was part of the end. She was not interested in couples therapy. She wasn't interested in individual therapy. And she essentially said to me, I'm the way I am, and if we can't work this out, then we should be divorced. And then I realized, all right, well, Chris Rock says, one person can't move a couch. Two people who are both working can move a couch real easy. One person trying to pull a couch is not going to work. So it's unless you have a partner who's also committed to making some changes, you can make all the changes in the world. I don't think you're going to fix the relationship.
Can you be a proponent for our listeners? Because even though, I was a psychiatrist for many years and a psychotherapist for many years, many of our listeners still kind of sort of don't get it.
Right.
Oh, here's this therapy, what is talking going to do, et cetera, et cetera. Can you share some of the things you discovered through therapy, or maybe even when you were a therapist, that just people would just never in a lifetime discover on their own that might be valuable to them?
Right. And so the key to therapy, I think, is that people say, I could talk to my brother, I could talk to my father, I could talk to my best friend. Yes, you could do that for maybe 20 or 25 minutes, and then they run out of bandwidth. They run out of the ability to be completely there for you, to not inject their own situation into it, and then to be with you there week after week as you start developing whatever themes you're working on. And so, again, I got when I went back into therapy, maybe the first 4, 5, 6 weeks, we're still complaining about my ex, and then complaining about the situation I was in. And then the therapist sort of said, I told a story about how, I don't even know how it came up, that the trunk of my car had boogie boards for the girls, and it had this, and it had all sorts of stuff in the trunk of my car. And she said, well, what's in the trunk of the car that's for you? And it really opened my eyes. I was like, she was basically saying, what are you doing for yourself at this point? How are you fixing yourself? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? You're not just a dad and an ex-husband and a lawyer. Who are you as a person? And from there it developed. And week by week, my therapist would point out things that I was saying, and I didn't realize what was underneath it. And it really led me to understand myself a lot better. And so, for example, a problem in my first marriage was that I was very involved in parenting. My ex-wife wasn't. And I just felt like, well, she never put any time in, and I was doing all the parenting. And as I took apart the issue, I realized maybe I was better at parenting, but it became a competition. Who's better at it? And I took a lot of pride in being a good parent. And as I became a better and more involved parent, it squeezed my ex-wife out. And so she had less and less room to try and be a parent. And I just didn't understand that, how I had contributed to her sort of withdrawing from the situation. And honestly, once we were divorced and now she had the girls half the time, she became a great parent. There was plenty of room. I wasn't blocking her. I wasn't taking all the accolades. Oh, he's such a great father. And it made me realize that it was my ego and my wanting to feel wanted and to receive the accolades that was squeezing her out. And it also taught me the lesson that a good partner can't be in competition in any way with their partner. And so you can't have like a sibling rivalry. I work harder, I make more money, I deserve the bigger piece of cake. You've got to be working together with your partner. And that was a invaluable lesson in terms of meeting my wife and us getting along. Anytime we find ourselves bickering over who had the harder day, or we sort of look at each other and say, this is not a sibling rivalry. And it snaps us out of us trying to figure out who had a harder day, who's more important, who's got the bigger issue, into realizing we're both just working together.
I'm going to share an observation that that's been true of a lot of people, or not a lot, but a number of the people that I've seen over the years. And you just triggered it about with the boogie boards and everything in the car. Where was there any room for you? And I'm wondering how this lands for you. I've run into some people who will say that they really didn't know what it was like to feel wanted for themselves. So they turned their relationships into feeling needed, and then they would satisfy those needs. But over time, what some of them would say is, I don't know what it's like to be wanted. I like feeling needed, but I don't like feeling used or taken for granted.
Right.
So can you understand that kind of dynamic that, I live to be needed. I love taking care of people. I'm not sure what it's like to really truly be wanted.
Mhm.
Maybe, but maybe if you can relate to that, maybe what's different about your current marriage is we both want each other. It's not just needing each other, but we
Right.
actually look forward to seeing each other. We want each other. So can you understand that dynamic at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It's with my wife Carol. I can't wait to get home and see her, even if there's nothing to talk about. I don't have anything. A lot of times she asks me how is work, and I say good enough, because she doesn't want to hear the stories about the divorce or the litigation tactics I used or how I took someone apart on a cross-examination. Those sort of boring lawyer stories don't translate well into talking to your spouse. And she she owns a restaurant business and she runs catering. So, her day is they're testing a new cupcake or they came up with a new recipe. It's sort of fun, exciting work. But the point is that I can't wait to get home to her just to be with her and share time with her, even if we're not talking about anything. And we're just sitting around talking about, we now have two sons, a 5-year-old and a 10-month-old. That doesn't leave a lot of time for sitting around and talking, but if we can find 10 minutes here, and then after they go to sleep at 8:30, a half an hour, it's the joy of just being with each other and then doing things. So we go on hikes together. We used to go to Soul Cycle together and sit on bikes next to it, which seems unbelievable now that we were in a room with 50 other people sweating, breathing the same air with everything that went on with COVID. But we enjoy doing everything together, even if it's reading the paper on Sundays on the couch. That's different than my other relationship, where I was always trying to help my ex-wife so that I felt like I was needed or important. So she's a real estate broker, and I found myself putting up signs in front of new listings when I was wearing my suit and my wingtip shoes on the way back from court. And so it's just, I was going so overboard in trying to be helpful when you could pay someone $10 an hour to do that. You don't need me to do that. And it was the same thing with raising my daughters. If we went to a party with a bunch of other families and the kids were in the other room and they were having fun, I still felt the need to go check on them to make sure that they were fine. And this time around, I just know if they have a problem, they're going to find me. I don't have to step away from the adults, take myself out of my situation and go into another situation to prove that I'm a good father. And so that's the whole difference. And I don't know if it's meeting someone at 25 versus meeting someone at 41, or having the life experience I've had, or finding the right partner. But it allows me, being with Carol allows me just to be me. And we just enjoy each other. And it's not about, I did a podcast with Dr. Goulston. I was on Good Morning America, where I represented this basketball player's wife. None of that stuff ends up being what's important.
And was Carol married before?
No, she had committed the prior 15 years to building up her business, never taking a day off, never taking a vacation. And the funny thing is, we met we shared the same therapist, and we met in the waiting room, which isn't supposed to happen. But I had to reschedule my appointment because I had to be in court, and I get places 15 minutes early. And so I ran into her in the waiting room, and we started talking. And then the therapist came out and told me, well, you're here an hour, you're here at the wrong hour, come back in another hour. And when I came back, the therapist sort of asked me, when are you going to start dating? And I said, I haven't really thought about it, but that I know you can't tell me about her, but that woman I just met out in the waiting room is a very interesting woman. I think I'd like to get to know her better. And I reached out to her and we started a relationship. So I met my wife in a therapist waiting room. It's a uniquely LA story.
That's a wonderful story. Well, I'm sure that when you met her in the therapist waiting room, you probably thought, this is different than my ex. My ex would never be here. Gee,
Right.
this is someone who is ostensibly trying to better herself, again, after they go through the first few weeks of complaining about this or that. But gee, this is a person who's interested in becoming better. And that must have really caught your attention.
Yeah, yeah. And after, I mean, the initial thought was, well, I mean, she's in therapy. I mean, what's wrong with her? And then I said, well, I'm in therapy. What's wrong with me? And then I got quickly past that and I realized we're both working on ourselves. And, I was trying to figure out how to be a better person and a better a partner. And in fact, she was trying to do the same thing. She had been dating, hadn't found the right person, couldn't figure out what it was about her that was making these relationships not work. And so we were both working towards the same goal from different ends. And the funny thing is that that was on a Wednesday, and on Friday, the therapist left me like a cryptic voicemail message. You know that person you were asking about? You should probably reach out to her. I shouldn't say anything or goodbye. And I wish I had saved the voicemail message because it made me then reach out to Carol and say, we met for like 15 minutes. Maybe we'd like to, go out and have some coffee or something like that. She was excited to hear from me. And I'm not sure I would have done that unless the therapist had left me that message. Again, she was in some way perhaps bending the rules of confidentiality and not, crossing her cases, but I'm glad she did it.
So what was the first date like?
Well, the first date was I sent her this email saying we should get together, and it was on a late Friday. And at the time, my wife didn't have a smartphone, and so she only read emails at work, and she'd already gone home. And so I didn't hear from her the whole weekend. And I thought, oh, so much for that. She's just not interested. I didn't hear from her for the weekend. And Monday at about 10 in the morning, she got into work, saw the email, and wrote me a long email message, how excited she was to hear from me. And I had no idea how to respond to it. I hadn't dated, I'd been married for 14 years. I dated years before that. I hadn't dated at all. I didn't know how to deal with it. So I jumped in my car and I drove over to a restaurant and I called her. I said, I'm parked in front of your restaurant. I got your email. Let's have lunch. And so she brought me out a turkey club sandwich and we sat for an hour and sort of got to know each other. And she later told me she couldn't believe my courage in just coming over. And I told her it was more cowardice because I didn't know how to respond to her email and what to write. And I figured I'm just going to go over there and see how it goes. It's something I'd never done before and haven't done since, but it sure worked that day.
Yeah. And how have the children from your first marriage and your young children, have they integrated together well? And
it's because of the age difference. They go from 23 down to 10 months. My first daughter was off at college when we had my older son. My second daughter was a senior in high school. And so they didn't have those sort of competing interests. Oh, dad's having new kids. And so they come around a lot. My daughter's now back from college and she comes by the house 2 or 3 times a week and sees my older son, sees the younger son, and it's a great combination. And whenever my younger daughter's back from college, she always stops by. And so it's they had the distance not to be competing, and they still relate to each other in a very wonderful way.
If you're listening in, because I sometimes speak to our listeners, even though they hear the episode later. If I was listening to David as you, my listeners, I'd say, this is a really, and I mean this in a positive way, this is a real normal person. No, really thoughtful, and add that to the fact that he's in family law. So, he's someone who's thoughtful. He would think about your well-being. I can't believe I'm going to say what I'm going to say, but I know a deceased family lawyer. You'll probably know who it was. He died some years ago. And he used to say, my favorite clients, and he was known for his kind of edgy wit. He said, my favorite clients as a family divorce attorney are those who are rich, angry, and wrong.
Right.
Because they will throw all kinds of money
Right.
at getting even and being right. And everybody would sort of chuckle about that. And yet, there's a certain stereotype about lawyers who don't have any psychological background and not really being interested in the whole client, their family life, their individual life, their psychological life. So I occasionally make recommendations to my listeners. If you have need of someone who's kind of a healthy, not only role model, but a healthy family law attorney, I think David would be someone you'd want to track down. But before we go, I do want to get back to your book, Redesigning Your Emotional, Financial, and Social Life After Divorce. So can you share with us some of the things that are in the book that people might be facing when they get divorced, and maybe some things that would help them deal with any of those?
Sure. So the book pulls together my experience as a therapist, my experience 25 years as a family law attorney, and my own personal experience going through divorce. I've seen with a lot of my clients, and I wanted desperately to avoid it myself, the people who get stuck. They're divorced or they're divorcing. They realize they're sitting in a mud puddle. They're uncomfortable. Their pants are wet. They're dirty. And they can't get up and start walking. They can't figure out where they want to start walking. They can't figure out how to get out of this mud puddle. So they sit. And so that's where the moving on idea is that, listen, you've just been through a very trying process, a huge blow to your ego. You've now depleted your assets in half. You were with someone and known as that person's spouse. Everything in your life has changed. And so now you have an opportunity to decide, what do I want to do next? And how do I want to run my life next? And the way I did is I got a big piece of paper, an 11 by 17 piece of paper, and I made blocks. One block was financial, and one was, where do I want to live? And one was, who do I want my friends to be? One was, who do I want my next partner to be? And there was a block about my parenting. And I split each block in half. And on the left half was, what are the problems that I see? And on the right, I wanted to put solutions. So in each chapter of the book, we take one of those blocks and I try to teach people a simple problem solving approach to identifying what's bothering you. Number two, trying to generate as many possible solutions as possible without editing or saying, oh, that'll never work, or poo-pooing ideas. And then third, looking through all those options that you've brainstormed and picking one, and not taking a long time. Just pick one or two, will rise to the top. Pick one, take it, and actually try and institute it. If it doesn't work, you can circle back and pick the next best option and see if that works. But most of the time, the one you pick actually works. And so, well, it may seem old-fashioned to get that piece of paper. I find putting my problems, the things that are irking me, the things that are bothering me, down on paper and writing what's wrong, and then multiple ideas of how to fix it, that gets me moving forward rather than sitting in the mud puddle. So chapter one is fixing yourself. And I encourage everyone to get into therapy and to figure out who they are and who they want to be and what they need to change about themselves. Then there's a chapter on, where do I want to live? We sold a house in Bel Air, and now where am I going to live? Well, the girls are in school here, but I think I might meet someone there, and I have a choice to figure out where I want to live. There's a chapter on finances. Have I really been careful with my finances, or have I just been sort of spending and making enough money that I don't run out of money? And so each chapter gets people to focus on it, takes them through a problem-solving approach, and hopefully helps people resolve their issues.
As you're saying it, I'm saying this is so common sense that it's uncommon sense.
Right.
I mean, it's just hidden in plain sight. And my listeners, if you're listening in, you could say, that's so obvious. What I would say to you, it's not obvious.
Right.
Most people don't think like this. Most people don't sort out the different parts of their life, identify the problems and challenges, identify the options, try out some of the options, being non-judgmental towards yourself if something doesn't work, circling back. I mean, it is just, I can see why the person who referred you to me said, you know, you have an evergreen book here. This
Yeah.
is a book for all ages and all generations. So she was right in putting us together. What are some of the things that, one of the things that I ask people, because every now and then I'll have people on the show who really seem to have it all together. Now, what I like about your energy is often those people who seem to have it all together, they have a lot of alpha energy. They seem to have solutions to everything. I mean, they just seem to be, and what I've told them is I've said, you know, if I was listening to you, I'd be very impressed, but I would think, well, that'll work for you because you're perfect and I'm flawed. And then when I ask them, which I'm going to ask you, is there anything you could get better at? Because it just seems so simple that me, the listener who's a tad messed up, couldn't do it. What is something that even now in your life you'd like to get better at?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, none of us is perfect. No one gets through life without falling down one, two, three, multiple times. It's the question of, do you get yourself up and keep moving? But I'll give you an example. I have a 5-year-old who's in TK. And when he started at this preschool that my wife found, I said, oh, this is so liberal. They teach problem solving. They sit down, they discuss their feelings. I was like, it's preschool. They go, they kick a ball, they play with crayons. How much do they actually need? And one of the first times I dropped my son off at school, I was watching and he was playing with friends and the ball went up and got stuck on the covers that they have to keep the sun from beating down too hard on the playground. And I just went over and I was just going to get the ball down because the kids were all looking up and they wanted to play with it. And the teacher pulled me aside and said, wait, just wait. We want them to try and figure out how to fix it. And so the teacher said, how are we going to get that ball down? And someone said, we could throw sticks at it. And someone else said, we could throw another ball at it. And someone said, we could pile up crates. And they came up, they engaged in problem solving themselves, as opposed to if I just gotten the ball, they don't learn a thing other than maybe get someone who's taller than them, which doesn't always work. And so what I'm still trying to make myself better at is being more patient, allowing people to come up with their own solutions and not jumping right in. And that also comes down to, being a friend. Someone says, oh, I'm upset about something. They don't necessarily want you to jump in and give them the answer. They want you to listen. They want to express this. They want to feel heard. And so it's not just a talking and solving people's problems for them. It's listening and having the patience to then wait until they need the help and then giving some prompts, which essentially takes me back to the start of my story, that if I'd understood that better as a psychologist, I might have made a better career as a psychologist, thinking that I just wanted to give people the answers. It's worked out great for me, and I enjoy being a family law attorney and bringing my former career as a therapist into every day of my practice. But really, all of us has the ability to figure out what's going on and how to fix things if we take enough time and we have people to work with who will listen to us and help guide us when we need that guidance.
Yeah. I'm going to share something with you because these are often conversations, and my listeners, and this is mainly an audio podcast, can't see it, but on the video call behind me, there's a book. One of the books that I wrote is called Just Listen. And one of the things that I'm trying to teach around the world, and boy, does the world need it more than ever. Something I've realized in the past several years is that underneath people listening to you is someone listening for something.
Right.
And something I can get better at is to realize that in real time, because if I can just be curious what they're listening for underneath they're listening to me, and then pause and try to help them reveal what that is, it's amazing how much richer the conversation and connectedness is. And it's so much easier to get into they're listening to you. You give them solutions. They nod from the neck up. And something else I realize is there's a lot of people who will nod, say, oh, that's great. And then they don't follow through on any of the suggestions or advice.
Right.
And what I've discovered is those people were listening for something underneath they're listening to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what they're listening for is to feel emotionally safe enough to reveal to you something that they may not be aware of. Like,
Right.
I'm scared I'll never get married again. I'm scared maybe I'm a little crazy.
Right.
I'm scared that I'm not a good person because I'm pointing at the other person with all my energy. Maybe it was me. So I'm trying to share that and practice that. It's not easy because, as you say, when you're experienced and you have all kinds of solutions, it's
Right.
very easy to jump in and rush to the solution. But what I've realized is when they smile and they go like this and they don't follow through, they wanted something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have been just terrific. So where can people find out more about you? I think we mentioned that at the beginning, but it's worth repeating, both the title of the book, where to find you, and find out more about you.
Sure. So the book is Moving On, Redesigning Your Emotional, Financial, and Social Life After Divorce. And that's movingonbook.com. And that'll then take you to a link. So it'll take you right to Amazon if you're interested in buying the book. And I think the book is about post-divorce, but there's a lot to be learned about moving on from whatever problems you have and how to get yourself out of the mud puddle that you find yourself in and up onto dry land and moving forward again. And then more about me is glassfamilylaw.com. That'll take you to my firm's website, my bio, information about my litigation victories and other media appointments, but importantly, how to reach me by email or by phone. And I encourage people to call if they've got questions. The first hour is free. It's after that, I'm pretty expensive as a family law attorney, but the first hour is free. So I try to make it as informational as possible without any pressure that you've got to hire me or you've got to do this or you've got to do that.
You know, you mentioned something in your summary that I want to point out. You don't have to be getting divorced or having been divorced to get value from this, because what you'll get out of this book is really how to take more charge and more control of your life. And there's a possibility that if you get this book and start to take charge of your life, especially your emotional life, so that you find out that maybe you're blaming someone for things that you need to improve in. I mean, there's a possibility that this book could help you prevent getting divorced.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage anybody who wants to improve themselves, who's in a relationship, dare I say that even if you're not in a relationship, I think being able to approach your emotional, financial, and social life in a very constructive way is only going to help you. So David, thank you for being on. You've been like I mean this is a compliment, you know, and you might say, oh, but I'm a tough litigator when I need to be. You're like the elementary school I always wanted. You're like, you know, like you're like a Mr. Rogers, but I mean that in a good way. And I'd like to be in your neighborhood any chance I can get.
Well, this was a lot of fun, and honestly, coming to that conclusion that I've come full circle back to listening and allowing people to figure out their own problems. I didn't think about until I was talking with you. So thank you for helping me get to that realization that I've that I'm really am providing good counseling to my clients, even as a family law attorney.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you, David. And to our listeners, thank you for listening in. Please do leave comments, reviews on Apple Podcasts. Share this with people, especially share this episode with anyone you know who's going through a divorce, contemplating a divorce. This is a real keeper. So until next time, wake up calls come all of our way. We don't always wake up the first time, but there'll be another wake up call coming behind it. And sooner or later, you'll wake up. So until that time, everybody take care of yourselves.